And I think I heard Mike Boyle say this once. It's like the ice cream man and the dentist. It's like off season, private sector, you're the ice cream man. Like everybody's trying to go see you and work with you. And then in the team in season, it's like, man, I just played 30 minutes. We got in late, or we got a game tomorrow. We're on a back to back. Like there's so many other things that go into the context of what you're doing. But like the day to day, like X's and O's, there's a lot of overlap.
Welcome back, Pushin Performance family. It's your boy Phil on a solo mission today, but don't worry, I'm joined by my friend, Dr. Keegan Ross. Keegan, formerly with Exos in the private sector as a coach and a physical therapist, who is now working in professional basketball as a coach and PT, is an absolute wealth of knowledge. In our conversation today, we get into Keegan's journey, his decision to go from being a coach to being both a coach and a PT, and some of the major principles that coaches can learn from physical therapists and that physical therapists can learn from coaches. And we also dive into the major differences between working in the team and the private sector. And again, some of the things that each setting can learn from one another. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I did recording it. I was thinking, you've been quiet on the pickleball front, and I just want to know that I just want to know what's really like. Was it the baby? Was it the job change? What's good on the
real
pickleball
G's
front?
move in silence, man.
Training low key.
Dude, it's a little bit of everything. You know, the job for sure in season wise, like Phoenix prime pickleball weather is prime basketball season. So it's tough, you know, like you're on the go 3 to 4 games a week. Just depends on the schedule. Definitely makes it hard. But anytime we can, we get out there. And then summertime, when there's tons of time to go play, it's 110 degrees outside. You can't really sit an infant outside on the sidelines when it's 110 degrees outside.
Unsafe.
It's kind of like a double whammy a little bit, but don't get it twisted. The skills are still there. The skills are
still there. Okay. I just wanted to check in.
No,
I got myself on the court the other day. It's been a minute. I've been playing a ton of tennis, but I'm still down to run some next time.
I'll be in Philly, so we'll make it happen.
When you slide through, well, I know the courts. We'll run a little bit, and we'll they're actually right down by the stadium.
See, that's cool.
They're right across the street from the stadium.
I'll have the paddles packed, man. I'll be ready.
Just gotta line that up. Oh, I love it, brother. But so, all right, we mentioned in the intro a little bit about your background, a little bit about what you've done in the past, what you're doing currently. But for all the listeners, can you just break down a little bit about your journey of becoming a coach and a PT, which I guess is becoming a tiny bit more common now, but I'd still say it's well outside the norm for most people.
Yeah, for sure. So the journey for me really started pretty similar to a lot of other coaches and PTs for the matter. Athlete growing up, loved sports, wasn't super great. Like I was better than average, but I wasn't, professional, obviously. And it's like, how do you try to improve your performance? And you just love sports, trying to figure that out. And I stumbled across strength and conditioning and exercise science and the whole performance scene. And so that put me on that path in college. So I was like, from the jump, full go S&C. But my first job as like a coach was at a personal training gym, like adults, kids, the basics for starting. And I ended up going to a conference with some of my coworkers where it was the Perform Better Summit. And there was, obviously Mark Verstegen, Nick Winkelman, Charlie Weingroff, Greg Cook, like all of these people in the field who were presenting. And I came across multiple people who were PTs and S&Cs. And obviously they were showcasing like a performance physio lens, like super specialized. But once I was exposed to that, I was just like, you know what? I don't really fully understand all the things they're talking about, but they know what they're talking about. At least I, perceive that, and they definitely do. But especially as a young coach, when you're around somebody like that, you're like, man, I don't understand anatomy like that. Like even listen to Eric Cressy go crazy about the shoulder and all this stuff. I'm like, man, I'm not there, and I want to be there, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of put me on the path of physical therapy, PT, like performance based, and it was always with a performance lens in mind. Really, at that point in my life, had never been to like a traditional PT clinic. Like, fortunately, never had any severe injuries, never had to really rehab like that myself growing up. Um, so my first exposure was like what I kind of stumbled upon and what I wanted to do. And that ultimately also led me to Exos. So during an internship as a coach at Exos during Combine, I got to see some high level coaches, but also really high level PTs. And I saw the whole system working together of like PTs communicating with coaches, handing off, working with coaches, seeing this whole like return to sport process, seeing really high level therapy in a performance lens. And once I was exposed to that and that culture, I was like, oh man, yeah, that's 100% what I want to do. But I kind of viewed it as like similar things, which I think is definitely, it is similar things. They're both the same, especially once you get to high performance in. But traditionally, people don't really look at it like that. So after the internship, I committed to PT school, got in, like stuck through that whole route. But then in PT school, it was just like, it was a grind, man. Like PT school is set up to put you in traditional places, right? You got to pass a test that's standardized,
Yeah.
that's not performance based. Obviously, there's a lot of great things, especially orthopedically. Like you got to have the foundation. So I'm not trying to bash that or skip that, but I had such tunnel vision on what I wanted to do, and PT school was not set up to teach me exactly that. It was a key step, obviously, um, but yeah. So fortunately, though, because of my internships at Exos in the past, my relationships there, after finishing PT school, I was able to kind of jump back in at Exos and do another internship, but on the PT side this time. And so, having already gone through the same facility as a coach, having those connections, that network, that understanding, that exponentially helped me as a PT student back in that same environment because I understood what the coaches needed from a communication perspective on a handoff. I also understood just like how the whole thing would flow and where they could help me and be an extension of rehab. And so that was really like the foundation for it all. And fortunately for me, after doing 2 internships after graduating, I was able to get a spot on out at Exos in Phoenix and got a ton of reps on both sides as a coach and a PT. But really, I was hired as a coach first. The position was full-time coach. I didn't have my license yet.
Interesting.
I accepted it knowing that I was going to be coaching groups all day long. I started that studying and working, and it just worked out that once I had my license, there was some staff members leaving and they needed help. And I was already right there and I was super eager, like, yeah, I'll add that on, like whatever. I'll take this person between groups. I'll do whatever. And dude, it just snowballed from there to being like, okay, yeah, this works. We can do this. And it would be times of the year where I'd be full-time physical therapy, and there'd be times of the year where I'd be full-time S&C, wouldn't treat anybody. And then there was everything in between that. And it was awesome, man. Like I got so much out of those years and those reps on both sides that I'm forever grateful, bro.
That's so dope. I don't know why, but I just assumed you came in because I knew you did an internship in
Yep.
both, and I just assumed you were hired as a PT first. And I don't know, maybe because when I met you, the first time we met, I think you were treating a ton. Like that was like a period where you were treating a ton, and maybe that's why. But to get experience on both sides is a lot of experience on both sides is so dope.
Dude, it was incredible. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I just wanted to be back at Exos. That was my sole goal, and thankfully, like, all my relationships, Victor Hall, Roy, BC, those people really like vouched for me and believed in me and were able to help get me a spot in AZ, and Victor was especially key in that. And I didn't care what the role was. I just wanted to be there. And I knew that if I was there,
Yeah.
like I was going to do what was required to grow and get what I wanted out of it. And fortunately, that's how it worked out, man. So,
So those are some good people.
yeah.
I love it. I love it. You mentioned something that I thought was super interesting about seeing both being a physical therapist as a coach as kind of similar things, right? And just working with humans, helping them get
Yep.
better. Where does that lens come from? Like, does that come from being a coach first, or does that come from somewhere
That's a
else?
great question. I feel like probably I've always associated it with being a coach first. I've always kind of introduced myself as like, yeah, I'm a strength coach and a PT, which a lot of people would do the opposite because, for the training
Mm.
or the specialization or whatever, which I'm not discrediting any of that. But I think just how I came up, like I always saw it through a coaching lens first. And I think when a lot of PTs will say they are strength and conditioning coaches because they've taken a certification and passed a test and read a book, and we all know that it's very different. Like you got to actually step on the
Yeah.
floor. How do you organize the session? How do you not control, but like facilitate a group? How do you
Yeah.
communicate to a wide range of people? How do you cue different people when they all move differently or understand things differently? And so it's just like those skills
Yeah.
are like so valuable. And understanding basic like programming and prescription, like obviously PTs get that, but it's definitely different from traditional PT
Mm.
school solely. If you only went that route, you didn't take on any other readings, you didn't dive into any S&C stuff, I think you would be pretty lost on like, how do I program for strength? Like, what is strength? What type of strength? What is
Yeah.
hypertrophy? Like, it's just, we're just going to grab this band today and we're going to try to progress to the next band tomorrow? And there's a ton of skills from the coaching side that I think really impact what you need to be able to do as a high level PT. And so I think just getting reps in both, I just see the similarities in both. You're going to do your eval. One, you're there to help people, right? Like they both want to help somebody improve performance, get back to playing, get back to doing what they love, or accomplish some sort of physical goal. And,
Yeah.
at least at a high level place, there's going to be some sort of evaluation. There's going to be some sort of plan drawn up from that. There's going to be some sort of in like applying the program. And then hopefully there's going to be a reevaluation of like, hey, have you made progress or not? And the only thing that is different from those two
Yeah.
lenses is like PTs will go super local and specific on like what causes your pain. Look at this specific joint, this specific tissue, this specific whatever. And coaches are more like, I'm assuming you already have those things covered and accounted for. So we're going to focus on purely capacity, purely fitness, purely whatever it may be. But that's like,
Yeah.
to me, if you just peel it way back, it's a ton of overlapping things.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Yeah. I've always thought of coaches and PTs. I've always questioned like, why can't PTs do X, Y, and Z, or why can't coaches, do a quick and dirty screen on somebody, not to diagnose, just to see what their capabilities are from a movement standpoint, and like where is that, where is the box that we can all kind of play in together in the middle, right? And I think there's probably a lot of space in there where we can kind of bleed over depending on our skills. Like you mentioned, PT school, if you go the PT only route, it doesn't give you that full performance lens, but it's still valuable. And I think it's the same thing when you look at like, I mean, you've gone through the CSCS, you've gone through undergrad for strength and conditioning. Like it's invaluable from a scientific standpoint, just to understand like very basic anatomy and physiology and physics and biology and chemistry and all this stuff. But it does nothing to prepare you for stepping out on the floor and you're like, holy
Yeah.
shit, like this isn't working. This isn't working like the book said it was going to work at all.
No, definitely not. How am I going to do, this certain flow in my environment with the equipment I have, with the number of people I have? Like, there's so many different skills that you gain from doing that. But yeah, man, I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of similarities, and you touched on like movement quality and like, assessing movement screens, and I think that was part of what made like FMS and that whole thing really crazy popular. Now, obviously, like people get, a little upset or whatever. We go down these rabbit holes about, oh, you can't predict injury. Well, of course you can't predict injury. Nobody can. Otherwise, we would all do that system. So every system is incomplete and wrong. So it's like, it's cool. But the fundamental principle is like, can we teach coaches some basic things on evaluating movement so that they can be a little bit more intentional about like, what exercise am I going to program for this person who has difficulty squatting because they have no hip mobility or ankle mobility or T-spine mobility? So,
yeah, and they're not injured yet, or not to say yeah, but they're not injured.
Correct. They don't have pain.
They're healthy, quote unquote. Yeah, no pain, no previous injury, right? And so they're fully within a scope of a coach.
100%. And that
right,
person is not going to go seek out PT. That person's goal is to lose weight and feel better, or to be able to play with their kids or do some running or whatever the event is. That's their goal. Yeah. And so a coach is going to be the person trying to help them with that. But if a coach has no idea, doesn't even think about the impact of not having ankle mobility or hip mobility or T-spine mobility and what that does to their movement quality, they're just going to be like, all right, 21-15-9 snatches and burpees, let's go.
Let's let it rip.
Come on. So, like not always to that extreme, obviously, but like,
yeah.
I think there's definitely overlap there. There's definitely some stuff we can do. And then like great coaches understand those things and know how to adjust exercise selection, how to cue, how to add a couple exercises to try to improve those things. Or even if you don't do that, hopefully you have a great relationship with a solid PT where you guys can now send people back and forth and have a solid relationship where you're both doing something to help the individual, which is why you're there.
I like the having a network in your area, people to refer out to, whether it's PT, whether it's dietitian. But you mentioned the communication piece and picking up from your time as a coach, understanding how to communicate these more quote unquote clinical things to coaches and vice versa. How can both sides kind of work together to be better communicators and put things in each other's language? So more often than not, I find that practitioners are saying the same thing. They're just like phrasing it slightly differently. And for whatever reason, it creates this massive roadblock in their mind. So how can we start to avoid that?
Man, stuff? I couldn't have said that better. Yeah, so I think about like what were my responsibilities as a coach? Like what do I absolutely have to take care of? What are my priorities for that session for that individual? And the things as a coach that I'm thinking about leading up to that session is obviously all the stuff I've done before, the goals, the program, like what specifically we're going after that day, what the session is focused on, how I'm going to structure it. But in the moment, it's like, okay, the goal today is, lower body strength and some conditioning. Well, I'm thinking about setup. I'm thinking about the main exercise I'm going to coach. I'm thinking about common cues, maybe some common things I might see that person do. I'm thinking about, certain weights and things I'm trying to get them to, or the overall outcome of the session. And that's really what I'm concerned about. And then if it's a group scenario, also, I'm concerned about how do I facilitate the program with the rest of the group also, which could be common if you're coaching a group of athletes and one person is returning from injury or, has something going on. You got to figure out how do I not take away from the experience of the entire group, still accomplish the goal of the session while still giving this one person a great experience without hurting them or setting them back or anything like that. The PT is thinking about, well, this person cannot do XYZ activity. This person cannot do plyos, single leg plyos. This person cannot do deceleration, but they're okay to do strength training. But they might not think about movement patterns. They might not think about how it's loaded. They might not think about some of the more finer details of your session. And so I think as a PT, understanding that coaches are trying to execute a session to to get a quality out of it or to get some sort of effect out of it, understanding what that session looks like, understanding the movement patterns that are in that session or the general blocks. Hey, we're going to do a warm up. We're going to do some jumps. We're going to do some sprints. We're going to do some power stuff. We're going to do some strength stuff. And we're going to finish with some conditioning. Cool. Now, as a PT, I could communicate to you as a coach, hey, I don't think he's quite ready for plyos. Can he do some med ball work instead? Can he do, something else? Whatever modification you think is best based on that context. Just communicating based on the blocks, based on the session, based on the movement pattern for restrictions, as opposed to like super specific, very niche, like, oh, he lacks tibial internal rotation and extension of his knee. Like coaches can understand those things, but you're not thinking about that. Like, just lay it out to me.
Yeah.
Tell me what you don't want him to do. I don't want him to squat. Great. Can he hinge? Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. That's all I need to know. I need to know that. You know what I mean? Like, tell me what I cannot do.
Yeah.
But also know that if you send me an athlete and you're like, hey, they're good to go, then like, know that my job is to push them and I'm going to go.
We're going to train.
Right? So communicate the barriers in a way that's like what movement pattern, what exercise, what component, and then work together to find a middle ground.
Love that. I absolutely love that. Yeah, because I can think back to many a time, like, so my time with Exos on the sports side, I was with physical therapists who were a part of the hospital system and not a part of Exos. So it was kind of two separate entities in the same facility, working with oftentimes like the same athletes or the same, Gen Pop folks. And it was stuff like that where it's, we're talking about like a very specific function of a joint. I'm sitting there like, we're doing upper body today, man. Like, I'm not going to touch their feet. Like, it doesn't matter.
Good. I don't even do that.
They're fine. They can train.
You got it.
Yeah.
You know what?
Just tell me what they can't do.
You know what? He's going to bike. I'm just going to keep the other leg off of it. He's got 3 other limbs. We're just going to do that. Which, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like the amount of understanding or relationship on both sides can influence like how specific you get, right? Because obviously at the highest level, I think it gets very niche. Like, hey, we need to maintain speed in power qualities because we know based on reversibility principles that those are going to be gone within a week or at least start to reduce.
Yeah.
So how do we do that around this injury? Yeah. Especially if it's something like, hey, this person has a grade 1 strain. They can't fully sprint, but like they're trying to return to play really quickly. Well, I'm not going to take 2 weeks off of speed stuff and then try to just throw them back into a game and be like, hey, yeah, go sprint, you're fine, right? Because even if they're fine from a risk standpoint, their performance is probably suffering. And so super niche, like strong relationships would be like, okay, well, yeah, we can do shuttle jumps on the other leg. We can do med ball throws. We can do so many other things to maintain a stimulus to work around the very specific things.
If you've ever been to Wegmans, the grocery store.
I have not, actually. Add to my list.
Right, when you're on the East Coast, we'll get you to a Wegmans. It's just it's a spiritual experience. But my sister used to work there. It's spiritual. It's magical.
I love it.
My sister used to work there, and one of the things they would do, I don't know if they still do this, but they would make you like shadow and work other roles in the grocery store. So you would stock, you would work checkout, you would work the meat counter, you would work the seafood counter. So you got to see the full system. Yeah. Right. You get to see how everything works. And it's funny because like that's obviously a much larger system. Granted, maybe doing something more simple than return to performance and performance in general. But like you essentially did that. Like you had the opportunity to like, all right, I'm a coach and I'm going to understand to the nth degree what it's like to be a coach and what the goal of a coach is. And I'm going to go to PT school and now I'm treating people. Now I understand what is required and what a PT is thinking about. So now you have like, no matter what you're doing, granted you can do both, but like you have an appreciation for what they're doing, have an understanding of what they're doing. And then working with other people, you have an understanding of their mindset, their philosophy around coaching, training. And so like you're saying, it just makes the communicating really easy or easier.
100%. When you've lived it and you've felt the stressors or the friction points or the good points or whatever, you just like totally get their full perspective, and you're like, man, I know how I can help this whole thing by just being an effective communicator, and I know the exact points you really need to understand. Because you bring up a great point about understanding other roles. It's like, well, coaches don't really, like, I kind of been coming at it from a PTs getting to coaches, but also coaches haven't really had to be in the situation of PT where you're seeing people all day long, double booked. They all have pain and injuries, and you got tons of notes to write. And also, some other
Yes.
third party person is like, oh, yeah, it's not approved because I know a lot about performance, and you definitely don't need to do that, which they know nothing about performance. They have no idea. They're just
Exactly.
trying
Yeah.
to read a note and be like, oh, yeah, that sounds justified. So then PTs have a ton on their plate,
Yeah.
especially in traditional settings where they're in an outpatient clinic. If they take insurance, no matter what the company says, it's a volume based clinic. They got to get more people in because the insurance company is not paying them appropriately for their time. And if they are now, they will not be in the future. And so that's just the
Yeah.
reality of the challenges that they have to work in. But that's also the reality of why you need a good relationship with a great coach, because
Mhm.
you cannot necessarily, one, you probably don't have the facilities in traditional outpatient clinics. You definitely don't have the facilities to actually stimulate some of the adaptations we want, or the
Yeah.
space to expose them to aggressive decelerations, even sprinting at full speed. Like, you just
Yeah.
don't have the ability to do that. And so you have to rely on strength and conditioning coaches to help you execute that. But if a coach isn't fully updated on, like, hey, these are the parameters, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I want to avoid, then it's a bad experience for the person, maybe risk of re-injury, or there's just going to be friction there. And you're like, well, I don't know, I'm just going to do whatever. And then hopefully it's fine, but maybe it's not. But there's definitely a ton of realities on the other direction that PTs are dealing with that often involve them going home all night just to get caught up on notes, to turn around and go back the next day and be slammed with it all over again, which is probably
Yeah.
why they can't have an elaborate program or some of these other things.
Right. And then like speaking for myself, like specifically, that was my reality. Like I had no clue like what they had to deal with from dealing with insurance, taking notes, all this stuff. And I always wondered why, like, one, you're like you said, they're rifling through people, double book, triple booked at times. And then two, like, why is everyone like getting the same or similar protocols for like the same or similar injuries just to make the process way more efficient? Like to get all these people through and so they could like get the notes in on time. And it wasn't until I was like about to leave where I fully understood that reality. And I was like, oh, so I was like definitely being a dick. Like did because I didn't understand what the hell you guys were dealing with at all. So I'm sorry.
Dude, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. Because, right, as a coach, all right, I got my athlete in, got my client in, I'm going to do my assessment. Okay, I've reviewed the stuff. They told me their goal is in 6 weeks. So I'm going to work backwards, write this program. Boom, my work is done. I just got to execute the program. I don't have to go home and write notes. I don't have to go home
No,
and do it. Like, I just got to show up, bring the juice, and make sure it's a great session.
I don't have to justify anything to anybody.
Yeah. Nobody else is going to be reading my program saying that they, should have done the Versa Climber instead of the bike. It's like, okay, cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
We touched on it a little bit, but thinking about communicating with one another and stealing ideas and concepts and philosophies from one another. As we can start with coaches, is there anything specifically that you think that coaches should try and steal from PTs as far as like ideas or concepts that would really help them?
Yeah, I think um, further understanding of anatomy and movement are probably two to start with. Like, we kind of touched on it earlier, but like, if you understand the impacts of restriction at one place and potential things that happen somewhere else, maybe you can help kind of, use the word everybody uses, bridge the gap between these two things, and give the client a better experience or be an extension of their rehab session of like, hey, you were working on your ankle mobility over there. Like, we're going to continue to do that over here with X, Y, and Z things before you go into your main session. We're not going to take away from your goals or performance side, because when you're over here, the goal is performance, and when you're over there, the goal is something else. But just because you're over here doesn't mean that deficit goes away. And so just understanding to a little bit deeper level, movement, what makes up movement at each joint. It doesn't have to be crazy, like super niche to assessing for pain, but just like in general, when the hip goes into flexion, what happens? In general, when it goes into extension, what happens? Like just basic things like that. And then how does that tie to your movement patterns and your exercise selection? And if you understand that, then you can start to really, one, provide exercises to target those things, but two, make adjustments when you know that those things aren't there. Because if someone lacks knee flexion and they can't fully bend their knee, it doesn't matter what cue I give them, whether it's internal or external or the best analogy, they can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't understand that, then there's going to be some friction there, or your session could maybe be a little bit better, a little bit more intentional. Yeah, I think that's, probably the big thing. I think, I feel like on the performance side, evaluation is crazy big right now. Force plates, all of that is huge. But PTs test, retest all the time. I'm going to assess this thing. I'm going to do an intervention. I'm going to reassess this thing. Make sure I got change. Applying something like that in coaching could also be super valuable. Like, what is our goal? Let's assess that thing. Let's run a program. Let's reassess that thing.
Yeah.
I think that could be valuable.
Yeah. I feel like it's the pendulum swung with, like you mentioned, force plates and just the availability of technology in general. It's becoming way more accessible from just a price point. So like now testing and retesting starting to come back to the forefront on the performance side, I feel like, because of that, which is really cool. But even like looking back on my career, I feel like that's something I've done a very poor job of in a lot of environments, of like consistently doing that and building it into the program to see like, are we doing anything right? Like, are we making any meaningful change right now?
Yeah,
And
and
I think
obviously,
that's a good nugget to say.
yeah, the context too is obviously dependent on who you're working with, what's the goal, because the reality is also like most of what we're doing is, man, I just want to feel better. I just want to stay healthy. I just want to be a little bit more fit. And you probably don't need crazy assessment for that, to be honest, because if they're showing up and being consistent, then we're going to get better. But like the more niche, the more high performance, the more specific the goal or population, then the more you need to be intentional, assessing, etc. Especially, if you move into more like team setting based things, or places where there's a little bit more on the line and you're being evaluated by a lot of people who don't understand what you do necessarily, you got to be able to communicate things at a high level.
Yeah, 100%. Let's go the other direction. And you mentioned talking about what PTs can start taking coaches, whether it's understanding of programming for performance or to improve a specific quality, or the big one that jumped out to me was coaching and cueing. Is that something that's just not done super heavy in the PT space?
Zero, none. Like, I think it could have changed, and obviously every program is different. So I'm not just bashing things in general. I'm not trying to bash anything. I'm just saying the licensure exam is not evaluating your ability to be an effective communicator. It's evaluating your ability to be safe and make safe decisions for the human in front of you based on the presentation. Can you rule out things that are clinical that you can't take care of and need to be seen somewhere else? Can you identify things that are urgent? Can you come up with a plan that's safe enough that they won't get hurt and they will make progress? That's like, you got to understand that as a PT. But the reality is, like, when you're teaching somebody or trying to get them to execute some sort of exercise, you're typically used to working one on one with a patient. But then now we know the reality is you're going to be seeing more than one person, or sessions may overlap or whatever. Even if you don't do that, even if it is one on one, you still need to be able to effectively cue and communicate and coach the actual things you are trying to get them to do, not just like
Yeah.
do this thing and then the job is done. So communication and coaching, 1,000% is something that PTs can learn from coaches. Um, One, how to do it across different people and different understandings or different analogies, different ways. Even some of like the external cues that coaches are great at also, with like, I'm going to put this thing here so you are forced to feel what I want you to feel without me saying
Yeah.
something. Um, those things for sure. Definitely programming, like in the weeds, at least a little bit about like what is the key variables that matter for hypertrophy. What
Mm.
are the mechanisms of hypertrophy? Like, how do I even do that? Because post-operative, that's a common goal. We need that. Like, we need to get muscle girth back, especially after something like an ACL, an Achilles, whatever it may be. But we just have, I'm just going to do my basic 3x10. Like, it'll probably work for a while, but at some point, you're probably not getting as much out of that as you could be, right? And so, what do I need to change? Is it intensity? Is it volume? Is it both? How do I do that? And understanding that, I think, can definitely upskill your delivery and your outcomes.
Yeah.
I think the
I love
last
that.
thing maybe would be, and this is my own personal interest, so I understand that, we kind of talked about the handoffs and things like that and using coaches to help you
Mm.
execute on a care, but understanding in stage things, plyometrics, speed, agility, fitness. How do I make sure you're actually fit enough to compete? Those sorts of things also are traditionally not covered at all.
So like it almost basically the way education set up, and again, like not to bash it, it's set up that way for a reason, and it it serves the purpose that it has, but it almost like intentionally creates these like the silos that people talk about, where it's like, you're just learning about performance, you're just learning about physical therapy, you're just learning about nutrition if you're a dietitian, and then it's like, now let's, here you go, you're all working together, and then it's like, how the hell did we make this thing go?
For sure. And I mean, the reality is also most PT schools are not teaching you to be super niche in performance PT land. So this is all stuff from performance
Yeah,
PT land, which you got to go out and learn that on your own or get your clinicals or whatever. So
exactly.
yeah, no hate at all, but for sure, like those are definitely things that you could take from spending time with coaches and building those relationships.
I love that. I love it, man. Let's switch gears a little bit. A common thing that I hear from folks in the private sector is they're thinking about trying to jump to the team sector, and a common thing I hear about folks in the team sector is they're thinking about trying to jump to the private sector. So I was having only worked in the private sector, I was curious with now your experience working in a team environment at a very high level in basketball. What are some of the major differences that you found, likes, dislikes, things like that, to unpack it for folks who are on either side trying to figure this whole thing out?
Yeah, man, I'd say like people always assume the grass is greener in either scenario, right?
Yeah.
And like it, you know, you gotta put the work in wherever you're at and make it a good thing wherever you're at. If you're like negative and like whatever, it's gonna be like that regardless of where you're at. Every
Yeah.
sector, every job, every place has great things and bad things, and it just really comes down to like, what do you value? What are your non-negotiables, and what do you want out of this experience or your life or whatever?
Hmm.
The private sector is great if you don't want to travel, you don't want to work crazy late nights always. You want some sort of consistent routine, like I work at this time, I'm off at this time, I don't do weekends, or I get scheduled vacations, or I get whatever. you're going to have that from a lifestyle perspective in private sector. In the team setting, it's seasonal, right? Like there are times when I work every single day. There are no days off. In fact, there's not even necessarily Monday through Friday. It's a game day, it's a practice day, it's a travel day, it's back to a game day, it's a practice. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's no
Yeah.
it's Tuesday, do this. So it just the lifestyle pieces are obviously very different, and that's commonly what I hear about when you're trying to get out of team sector, like or team space, like back to the private sector, is the lifestyle just
Mm-hmm.
challenging. If you're on the
Yeah.
road, missing dinners, if you have family or whatever, like that's definitely tough. Um, so those things you have to consider. But the job itself is, to me, like the big differences in the team setting. It kind of comes down to, I don't want to call it pressure, but like you have people who need information, who need detailed information and want to know like how do we handle this situation? What is our plan? What is plan B and C in case that doesn't work? Give me timelines, give me updates, whatever. But like the day to day interactions of the athlete is really like pretty similar. Like you're
Yeah.
doing, you're trying to improve performance, you're trying to return from injury, you're trying to do whatever. So yeah, man, I think there's a lot of overlaps in the actual job itself per se, but there's definitely a lot of variables that make it different contextually. Example, just in team sport, like in season, like the
Yeah.
performance team is not the primary focus. I mean, obviously we think we're super important. We think we're the most important, right? But we're not. It's the sport, and the
Yeah.
sport is the thing that matters. And we are definitely take a back seat to that. And so
Yeah.
just learning how to work in those dynamics and those situations and when to push, when to give, when to pull, and like understanding that in the team setting is really big. But in the private sector, it's like everybody wants to come see you, everybody wants to hang out, everybody wants to work. And I think I heard
Yeah.
Mike Boyle say this once. It's like the ice cream man and the dentist. It's like off season, private sector, you're the ice cream man. Like everybody's trying to go see you and work with you. And then in the
Yeah.
team thing in season, it's like, man, I just played 30 minutes. We got in late, or we got a game tomorrow. We're on a back to back. Like there's so many other things that go into the context of what you're doing. But like the day to day, like X's and O's, there's a lot of overlap.
Mm. I like that. I love that. I think I don't know. I feel like, and maybe this is just the echo chamber I'm in, but I feel like and the friends that I have in the industry, but I feel like people typically pose it as like two wildly different roles, where it's like private sector and working with off season, and then the team setting working within season. Like it's so different. It's wildly different. But then like I like the way you zoom out, and it's just like I'm just working with humans and I'm making them better in specific ways. Like it's
Yeah.
the same. There's a lot of crossover.
There is a lot of crossover with the day to day X's and O's, like I said, but there is also still like I
Yeah.
totally appreciate the vast differences, right? Like again,
Oh yeah.
the time available, like, is very
Oh yeah.
different. The For us, the access to equipment or space changes on the day. I might be at home in
Yeah.
my home practice facility, have every piece of technology and equipment under the sun. I might be on the road in a hotel that doesn't have any of it, or I might be in an arena
Yeah.
that has the minimum required equipment in a hallway. Like, so you got to be able to be very adaptable to some of those things. Again,
Mm.
like set person, set roster, set demands playing wise, set goals. Like there's definitely the fair share of differences, but I think like if you zoom way out and just look at the overall, like what am I trying to accomplish? Like how you do some of those things or underlying principles are definitely similar. Lifestyle is totally different between the two.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, man, team setting. There's just a lot of different like dynamics and things you have to learn and account for. Travel,
Mm.
other people involved in decision making, the sheer number of staff also may impact it. Like,
Yeah.
private sector, you're probably the person that's responsible for executing certain tasks. On a team setting, depending on your team size, you may have two or three other people there to help you execute the same tasks. So you may have significantly less like day-to-day responsibilities per se, but the reps you get, they gotta count, you know? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate both sides, but I think like just how I kind of framed it up is like the lifestyle or the demands of the job versus like the actual like client facing. I'm still coaching. I'm still queuing. I'm still building relationships. I'm still like I'm there for the athlete. Obviously I work for a team or they're my employer, but the reason I'm there is for the athlete.
Yeah. Right. It's still the mission's still the same.
For sure. But for people who are considering like, do I make a switch? Do I not make a switch? Like, I think you got to get super clear on your values, what you want out of life, like
Mm.
what you want your life to look like, those sorts of things, as opposed to just being like, oh, I want to work in professional sports because that's the top. It's
Yeah.
like, well, if you aren't super clear on like what you actually want, and if you don't understand what it actually looks like, are you ready to be getting off of a plane onto a bus at 2 a.m. to go unload a truck to then drive home? Like, and then also get up the next day, go into practice at 10, leave practice at 11 or 12, get on a bus, like do it all over again, fly to a new city? Are you ready to be gone from your family for a week to 2 weeks at a time? Are you ready to do those things? Because
Yeah.
if you're not, then like just because it's professional doesn't mean it's the highest thing.
Yeah. Or that it's going to be fulfilling.
Yes,
Right.
like you got to know
I
what you want out of it.
love the call to values. I love the call to values, man. Like and that's something that we end up talking about a ton because I feel like people don't. It takes work to get to that point where you're like, this is what matters to me, and this is this is what gives me energy. This is what allows me to feel like I'm living a fulfilling life. And I think it's so easy. Maybe it's because the strength and conditioning industry is just like a chronically online industry for whatever reason. But it's so easy to kind of judge yourself by someone else's scoreboard. Like, damn, like this coach is doing X, Y, and Z, or damn, like this PT's got this client, and it's like
Yeah,
that might not actually make you happy. Like that might not actually be the thing that you care about, and that's okay.
yeah. There are a ton of realities that people don't consider with
Yeah,
what comes with working with professional athletes, professional sports, professional team, even professional athletes in the private sector. There's tons of stuff that people think would be like, oh, that's incredible. But then if you're like actually there with the realities of what's happening, you're like, damn, that was not what I thought it was at all. Or like
yeah,
there's other things I didn't consider. And
yeah,
like if you're serious about like this is the path I want to go, I would just like make sure you do some reflection, some actual like learning into what that day to day looks like, which can be very tough because it's not like you can go get an internship or shadow most of the time. Some organizations do that, but
hmm
there's definitely some barriers to get there because of the sensitivity of the information that's being openly
yeah,
shared in those spaces. And so, reach out to people who've been there to have open and honest conversations, because if you don't really know and you spend your life trying to do this and then you get there and you're like, damn, I'm not even happy. Like that's crazy. Or
yeah,
you leave something and you're like, you know what? It was great here, but I just was chasing this title, this logo, this whatever, for the logo. And then you get there and you're like, I
yeah,
actually don't like that. And it's not for you, And I think that's
yeah,
the piece that a lot of professionals kind of miss out on because they just get in this chase of like, do more, do more, do more, do more. And it's like, no one, you know what I mean? Like, it's what do you want? It comes down to you and your family and
yeah,
your situation. So just because it's pro sports doesn't mean it's better or worse than something else. So,
yeah. I love that. I get to work with a lot of coaches and a lot of coaches in the Gen Pop space, whether it's like a corporate facility, whether it's a community facility, and it's always or often said like, I want to work with athletes. I want to work with athletes. I want to work with athletes. And it's just like, why?
Yeah.
For what? Like, what is that? What is that going to do for you? Because again, zooming back out, you're helping humans get better.
For
in
sure.
the situation you're in, you're going to help humans get better. Granted, yes, there are vast differences in the qualities that you're training and the things that you're doing and the people that you're working with, but doing that work to figure out what purpose does that serve for you?
Right. And yeah, if you think, touched on something good there, if you think it's about doing cool things, well, in the team setting, like, consider the context. You're in season. The sport is the primary thing. There is very limited time to do training. And also think about like competing stressors. Like if I'm like, oh, I just want to work with athletes because I want to do speed and agility. Well, guess what? You're not doing speed and agility really in the team sports setting either, because they have practice, they have games. Like it just depends on, are they a starter, are they a
Yeah.
rotation, are they reserve? There's a lot of contextual factors, and there's situations where you may do it, but it's not going to look like what you think it will look like because of all of the other factors.
Right. And that comes from like you said, trying to fully let's fully understand what each environment is instead of just operating off of like your assumption based on someone's post or what you think it might be, because it's probably off base.
Yeah, for sure. Or you're just getting like a snapshot. You're getting one snapshot of like a cool courtside photo. Damn, that looks so sweet. Yeah, but there's a lot of things that led up to that one moment, and that moment was just like boom, and it was like such a small percentage of everything that happened. So, and yeah, I guess I just say that to call out so that people actually spend some time trying to figure that out. But if that's what you want to do, then absolutely, like, go for it, because
yes,
it is super fulfilling. Like there's a ton of stuff that I value from being in a team setting. There's a ton of stuff that I've really enjoyed by making the switch, and I'm glad that I've gone and done that. Like I don't regret any of it, and I enjoy what I do right now. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Hell yeah, man. I love it. Well, I don't want to take up any more family time on a Saturday. So I'll let you get the rest of your day back. Thank you for coming on, brother. Before you go, where can people reach out if they have questions, want to get to know you a little bit more?
For sure. Yeah, I'm an open book. So previously was pretty active on Instagram. Still on there. I just haven't been super active posting lately. Life things. Work, newborn, other priorities come into play. But I'll be back on there at some point for sure. But the handle is Keegan_Ross_DPT. So reach out there, DM, whatever questions, want to know more about team setting, private sector, PT, S&C, whatever, just hit me up.
Yeah. No, hit up Keegan. We became friends because I started bothering him and asking him a ton of questions. So hit his line. He's a wealth of knowledge. And yeah, bro, whenever the schedule frees up, get back on the old IG grind. You're posting some valuable stuff out there for people.
For sure, yeah. I'll be there at some point for sure. But no, Phil, I appreciate you, man.
Pick up all first, though. Pick up all, then IG.
Yeah, of course. Clearly. I mean, priorities. But no, man, I appreciate you. Love what you guys are doing with Pushin Performance. And thanks for having me on, man. Really enjoyed it.